topic of Canadian Gothic, which is something I've been researching for years and years and years. And so when I was asked to do this, I thought, yeah, I'd love to do Canadian Gothic for Heritage Ottawa. And then I guess it was about two and a half weeks ago, and my wife and I were in Sicily, of all places, and I discovered that the latest and frankly probably final version of the extension of the Chateau Laurier was going to be unveiled to the public via the city's website today. And I thought, you know, this is a big, big heritage issue, and it's one about which I've been very, very vocal for almost 3 years now. I couldn't bear the thought of addressing the membership of Heritage Ottawa on the day that thing was released and talking about Canadian Gothic. It just seemed that this was not a good thing to do. So I pleaded with Louise and the other board members of Heritage Ottawa and asked them for permission to completely throw away my playlist and completely dispense with the presentation that I had already prepared and do a completely new one that I hadn't prepared at all. Mercifully, I had a great flight home, and the guy in front of me didn't recline his seat, which meant I could open up my laptop and actually prepare this presentation. So thank you for indulging me on this last-minute change of topic, but it just seemed irresistible, and I thought we have to seize the moment and talk about this really, really important heritage issue. Now that said, I'm not going to talk explicitly about the Chateau Laurier that much tonight. I'm really going to give more historical context. Look at how this whole question of adding new additions, quote-unquote modern within the context of their times, or additions to historic buildings has been handled through history, because I'm a historian, and see if there's anything we can glean from that that will help us inform our assessment of what's happening with Chateau Laurier. So I'm referring to the Chateau a few times. It's not a talk about the Chateau, but obviously the Chateau Laurier looms very, very large over this entire talk. And in fact, what I'm doing here tonight is just joining in the game that we've all been playing for nearly 3 years now, a game called Pin the Tail on the Chateau. Day 981 by my calculations. Now, we've been trying for almost 3 years now to pin a tail on the Chateau, as I'm sure most of you know, and various tales have been come up with here for earlier versions of the tale for the Chateau Laurier. The latest version that was released today looks like this. You don't love it? That's all right. Well, that is where we're at now. And so it's been a really fraught affair, as I'm sure you know. It's been hugely controversial. The first design was unveiled. There was enormous resistance. Another design was unveiled. It was quite different. Enormous resistance. It's been an incredibly fraught issue for almost 3 years now. And it's so fraught and seems so intractable and so impossible to get right that you have to ask the question, you know, has no one ever faced this problem before? In the whole history of architecture, have we never actually had to deal with the problem before of how to make a new addition on an old building? And of course, I'm a historian, so I'm actually well positioned to answer that question. And the answer is yes, it's happened many, many times before. For as long as we have been building buildings, we have been adding to old buildings as well. So this is a problem that has come up many, many times in the history of architecture. And what I want to do is skip through a few examples in history and see what we can determine from them. Now, what you find is the way history has treated this problem varies greatly. And sometimes they just steamroll over the past. You know, they say, this is what we're building now. You know, that's an old Romanesque building from the 11th century. Or just the modern 13th century. We built Gothic. We're just going to stick this Gothic addition to it. You know, that would happen sometimes in history. But other times, and maybe more often than you might suspect, it has often been considered not just possible, but very desirable to pay close attention to the older building and carefully consider how to make a sensitive, intelligent addition to it. We tend to think of that sort of sensitivity and historical awareness as a purely modern thing. It's not. It's actually a question that has been considered by architects, master masons, designers of buildings for quite a few centuries. Now, my first real epiphany in that, the first time I realized that even hundreds of years ago, architects had an awareness of that, came when I was doing a lot of very, very close study research on building. Some of my current and former students in here will groan when they see this, because they've seen this before a couple of times in class. I was doing a lot of research on this building, Minster, Nottinghamshire in England. And it's a great case study for the sort of issue we're talking about, because it was built in 3 main building campaigns. There was there was a previous building on this site that's completely gone. It was demolished in 1109, and the start of the current building was built then. Part of that building was then knocked down around 1234 and replaced with a new bit in a modern style. And then another addition was made to it around 1290 in what was then the newest and most up-to-date and most modern style. So this building, built in 3 major building campaigns over the 12th and 13th centuries, is actually a really good case study in this question of, way back then, centuries ago, did architects care about this sort of thing? Did they pay attention to the historic fabric of the building when they were making new additions to it? And it was here that my own personal epiphany came, and I suddenly realized, yes, this isn't just a modern value or a modern idea. It happened there too. Now, I've actually written papers on this and gone through it in great detail, minutiae. You'll be very, very pleased to know I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm just going to show you one example that suddenly sort of flicked the light switch for me, made me realize that this sort of consciousness was there, even in the 13th century. So on the left, I'm showing you the choir of the church. It was built around 1234. And on the right, I'm showing you the entrance to what's almost the chapter house, which is sort of the meeting room of the church. It built around 1290. So there's not a huge span, about 60 years between the two. They're both Gothic, the style of the later medieval period. But they're different phases of Gothic. The one on the left, this 1234 building, is what we call early English Gothic, the first phase of English Gothic. And it's gone. And it's back. Okay. That's all right. Is there someone from Mark? The chapter house on the right is a middle phase of Gothic that we call decorated. And they are different, and we can even see, perhaps get some sense of why decorated is called decorated. They are different idioms of Gothic. Now, I just want to point out one detail here that made me realize what goes on in the mind of a mason in the 13th century when adding a new addition to an old building is on the agenda. I'm showing you the bottom of one of the piers in the 1234 choir. And it's a fairly conventional Gothic pier for the time. There's a core to it, there's shafts clustered around it, but there's also a very, very idiosyncratic detail here, which is not unique to Seville, but is much more common. It's quite rare generally and ubiquitous at Seville in this part. What I mean by that is each of those shafts that you see sticking up there has this edge sticking out, this protruding lip sticking out. We call that a fillet. And that fillet runs the full length of the shaft, and then when you get to the base, and you have these roll moldings on the base, the roll molding bulges out. I hope you can see it there in yellow. It bulges out where it meets that fillet. It's an odd, quirky little decorative touch. It's not particularly profound or meaningful. There's no symbolism to it or anything. It's not absolutely unique to something. You see it, say, in the south entrance porch of Lincoln Cathedral, in the south transept of York Minster, and a handful of places here and there. But every single shaft and every pier in the choir of Seville has it. It's just a feature that the master mason or architect of that clearly liked and thought, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to make it sort of a key signature for this whole space. And it makes Seville different from any other space I've seen from its time. And when you look at the top of the pier and the shafts and so on, the capitals, these blobby bits that serve as the transition between the vertical shafts and the arches, you see exactly the same thing. That fillet continues right up to the bottom of the capital, and just below the capital there's a sort of ring around there that we call necking. And once again, there's a little blip there where it sort of moves around the shaft. Again, it's just a funny little decorative detail. 1234, that's Seville's quirk. Now let's move to 1290 and the chapter house. Right inside the chapter house, you can see about lots of shafts, lots of capitals. This is, for 1290, a thoroughly modern building. The capitals are in a very naturalistic, very realistic style of foliage that is unique to the late 13th century. We've never seen that in the 1230s. It's much a modern building for its time. And the shafts are just round shafts with no fillets, nothing like that. So this is a building that speaks the decorative language of its generation, whereas the choir was a building that spoke the language of its generation. Now, except in one place, when you go to the main entrance of the chapter house, we're still at the entrance of the 1290 edition here, the entrance actually has that same quirk in a very self-conscious way. It's nowhere else in the chapter house, but at that entrance, again, you're completely coated in this naturalistic foliage, stunning stuff. This is a real showcase. You know, this is a showcase of the whole chapter house. When you look closely, there's the trunot, the post, in the center of that broad doorway. If you look closely at that capital, beautiful naturalistic foliage, it's a buttercup, but look at the shafts. Once again, you've got that fillet, and once again, you've got that negging that blips around the fillet. It's just a curious little detail. It's just you. Look at the base of this, same thing. You probably see where I'm going with this. There's the fillet, I outlined it there, and once again, there's the roll of the base that has this blip. Those details don't occur anywhere else in the chapter house. They just occur in this showpiece doorway as you enter the chapter house. There's no visual logic or continuity to having that feature here at all, except that it refers to the older building to which this has been added. The only way the master mason who did that doorway could have gotten that idea would be to look at the older building and say, I want to respond to that, I want to connect to that in some way, and that's the way he does it. So way back in the 13th century, you've got an example here of an architect, or what they would have called a master mason, who is making a new addition to an old building and clearly looking closely at some of the quirky, idiosyncratic little details of that older building and saying, I want that, I'm going to connect through that. Now once you're aware that this has been a value throughout history, then you start to see it again and again. Old buildings in Europe, as many of you I expect know, have been added to over many, many generations. And one of the things that's striking, especially in the context of the conversation we tend to be having around the Chateau Laurier, is that the need to produce something radically modern when making addition to a historic building has not always been felt. Here's an example. At this time last week, I was in Rome. I'm pausing for dramatic effect because I don't get to say that very often. But today I can still say it. And this is a church in Rome, Santa Maria Maggiore. What we're looking at here is the product of many, many, many generations of work. The oldest bits that we're looking at, I'm getting used to this actually. There, I had confidence. The oldest parts we're looking at, the colonnade, the entablature above it, most, not quite all, but most of the mosaic decorations above it are all 5th century. This is one of, quite the earliest, but one of the early Christian monuments of Rome. Because this is within a century of when Christianity had been legalized in Rome, and just a couple of decades after it had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. And so we're dealing with the fabric of this building that dates back that far. Now, if you look right down the church at the apse at the end, the apse, you can't see it because it's in deep shadow, it's not very well lit in the building, but the apse has a half dome, a semi-dome with a mosaic on it. That is mostly the work of the 13th century. The ceiling, the vault, the curved arch ceiling of the aisles, and the flat coffered ceiling, as we call that sort of ceiling with those recesses, date from the Renaissance, from the 15th century. And the newest thing you can see in this building is the baldacchino or canopy over the altar, right at the end, and it dates from the 18th century. So when you look at this, you're looking at a building. The oldest part of the building that you can see in this photo is separated from the newest thing you can see in this photo by roughly 1,300 years. And yet the whole thing is coherent, it's clear. There are no parts to it that seem to be feeling a compulsion to make a loud announcement that we are a different century, this is the present day, it's a different world, and that sort of thing. And you see this and you realize how many generations have contributed relatively seamlessly to a building like this, and you realize that this axiomatic principle that so many seem to hold now, that if you build, it has to be if you add to a historic building, it has to be in a completely contemporary mode, is not necessarily a value that has been universally held through architectural history. Not only that, it's not a value that is necessarily held in non-Western cultures. So the idea of adding to a building without massively changing it isn't just a Western notion. Let's have a look at this building, the Great Mosque in Cordoba in Spain. You can see it began 785, enlarged in the 9th and 10th centuries. So this dates from the time when southern Spain, Al-Andalus as they called it, was Muslim, Islamic, and some spectacular monuments from that period still survive. Now, enlarged in the 19th and 10th centuries, there are basically 4 building campaigns. I can just quickly show them to you on a floor plan. We started with that, then they had this, then they had that, then they had that. So it's actually 4 building campaigns, each one adding to an existing historic building. And yet the interior of this, I don't know if any of you have been to the Great Mosque in Cordoba, I see a couple of nods. The interior is remarkably coherent. Every single generation that added to this building added in a way that was virtually indistinguishable from what they were adding to. And that's interesting, because most architects today would rather chew on a box of thumbtacks than add to a historic building in a way that is indistinguishable from what they're adding to. And yet clearly, we're talking about 4 building campaigns over a period of over 200 years, and you have to look so closely and so carefully to figure out where one ends and the other begins. It's just little tiny details of construction methods and so on that will give it away for you. So there's an example, an Islamic example, of this value of adding to a building without actually fundamentally changing the character of the building. Now, that's not... There was actually one other major building campaign at the Great Mosque in Cordoba, which completely violates that principle. And it's kind of interesting to look at too. Because after the Christian Spanish reconquest of Al-Andalus, which was a gradual process, but after it was reconquered and these lands were re-Christianized, in the case of Cordoba, they had this amazing building, the Great Mosque of Cordoba, this vast forest of columns, and it's deeply impressive. And they thought, what are we going to do with this? Should we just knock it down? And to their credit, they did not knock it down. But what they decided to do was use it as the Cathedral of Cordoba. They didn't just use it as the Cathedral of Cordoba. They decided that if they're going to use it for that, they have to build an addition. So there's that thing, we've got to build an addition here. And so they built, in their own modern style, a brand new Cathedral of Cordoba, not next to this or against it, but right in the middle of it. There is the Cathedral of Cordoba rising like this strange thing from the roofs of the Great Mosque of Cordoba. Obviously, there was no effort made here at all to honor or respect or stick to the historic fabric of the building. But of course, this is a very different context. This building, that cathedral sticking out of there, is a symbol of domination. It's a symbol of victory. It makes an announcement to the world. And that announcement is, we won. Right? So it's a very different agenda and a very different result. It is in its own way just as conscious a response to the historic fabric as the stuff we looked at earlier. But the response they want to give here is very, very different. And exactly the same is true, not too far down the road. If you've been to Cordoba, you've probably been here to Granada, the Alhambra, the great Islamic palace in Granada. Once again, after the Christian reconquest in Granada, this, I point to it with arrows, Renaissance palace and Renaissance church suddenly grew up in the middle of the grounds of the Alhambra in a Renaissance style, a Christian European style. Once again, no effort in the slightest made to connect to the existing fabric, because it's a different statement they're making. They're not interested in continuity, they want to emphasize historical discontinuity. And they essentially want to turn the rest of the Alhambra rather, spread out around it, into a trophy. And so that's what they've done here. So it could go either way throughout architectural history, but it's always very, very purposeful. And what the common thread of all of these is that they are responding to the extent in certain ways, for certain reasons. Now, you could say that in the examples of continuity I've shown you, that I'm kind of loading the dice, because the distinctions in architectural styles in these eras are not that great. I mean, there's subtle, and I show you the early English choir on the left, with the decorated chapter house on the right, and I say, yeah, but they're both Gothic, they're both Christian, they're only separated by a little more than half a century. There's all sorts of good reasons why it would be natural to build in a harmonious way when you add the new fabric to their own. And you can say, even although bits of Santa Maria Maggiore were separated by many, many, many centuries, you could say there is a certain degree of cultural and certainly a lot of architectural continuity between the early Christian era, which you can see on the top, Santa Sabina, and say the Renaissance, which I'll show you with San Lorenzo and Florence on the bottom. So you might say, okay, I'm loading the dice and I'm making it a little too easy to point to continuity. So I want to set up an example, skip ahead a little bit in history, and set up an example where there's a bit more of a violent architectural culture clash. A clash between Gothic, the architecture of the later stage of the Middle Ages, which is what you see on the left, and Baroque, 17th and 18th century style practiced throughout Europe. On the left I show you Canterbury Cathedral, Gothic. On the right I show you the Radcliffe Camera in Oxford. Baroque, of course, a classical style descended from the architecture of Greece and Rome, and quite a deliberate, conscious break from the medieval Gothic tradition. What would happen if you had a Baroque architect add into a Gothic building? Well, it happened, so we can look at some specific examples. We start with Sir Christopher Wren, one of the most iconic English architects, best known certainly for designing St. Paul's Cathedral in London, but of course designed many, many other buildings, churches, public buildings, and so on and so forth. One of the most prolific, admired, famous architects of the English Baroque. Now, he had a very broad experience of architecture. He traveled to Italy, he traveled to France, and he had broad responsibilities as an architect in England, including he was responsible for maintaining the fabric of Westminster Abbey. I show you here the chapel of Henry VII at Westminster Abbey. He was what was known as the surveyor of Westminster Abbey, which meant he was responsible for maintaining it as an architect. And it's a Gothic building, a late Gothic building, and from this we can glean some sense of his attitude towards Gothic. And he looked at the ceiling at the chapel of Westminster Abbey, and his comment on that was, "It's a nice embroidered work." Now that is a real code. That's actually a real put-down, because architecture in the 17th century was considered to be a manly art. That was considered to be its character. Embroidery was considered to be a feminine pursuit. So when Christopher Wren calls the chapel of Henry VII, one of the great monuments of Gothic England, a nice embroidered work, he does not mean it as a compliment. So he did not like Gothic, he was not impressed with Gothic. So, we've established that. He gets an interesting job in the late 17th century. We have the gate to Christ Church College in Oxford, 1525, very late medieval, very end of the Middle Ages in England. It's a gate that didn't have a tower, and Sir Christopher Wren is hired to build the tower. Now, it's an interesting challenge for him. It's a Gothic gate. In fact, it's a Gothic gate that is quite closely based on the chapel of Henry VII in Westminster Abbey, a building he really didn't like very much. You see those polygonal, bulbous turrets on either side are essentially based on the chapel of Henry VII, and the equivalent feature there, which is just a few years older than Christ Church Gate. So that's his challenge. He's got to build a tower onto this gate that's built in a style that he doesn't particularly admire. So, jumped ahead of myself slightly, but here's an extraordinary statement he makes that, again, is almost inconceivable in the context of the current conversation that we're having about the Chateau Laurier. Because he looks at this problem and he says, "I resolved it ought to be Gothic to agree with the founder's work." So he's adopting a style he doesn't particularly like, doesn't particularly admire. He's saying, "I'm building a tower on top of a Gothic gate. It might be a mistake not to build in Gothic, so I guess I'm going to have to build it in Gothic." He adds a very interesting qualification to that. However, he says, "Yet I have not continued so busy as he began." So he's going to make it Gothic, but he's going to make it his own Gothic. Gothic that suits his sensibility. So here's what he does. So there's the gate once again. And just to remind you, this is Wren's idea of a great tower. That's actually one of his west towers from St. Paul's Cathedral. To Wren, that's what a tower ought to look like, but he's decided, well, I can't just build a tower like that. It's going to look ridiculous here. So instead, he gives us this, Wren's Gothic tower. And you can see it's Gothic. It's got pointed arches. It's got these ogee arches here. It's got pinnacles and buttresses. But it is simpler, cleaner, plainer. It's Gothic with Wren's sensibility. And he's managed to stay true to the original style of the gate, build something that's harmonious with it, but is still unmistakably his. And you see this happen again with one of Wren's pupils, another great Baroque architect of England, Nicholas Hawksmoor. Hawksmoor is famous for building several amazing London churches like Christ Church, Spitalfields, I show you here. Classical building, but very Hawksmoorian classical. Not full of decorative detail, but very robust volumes and angular and that sort of thing. You see the same sort of robust, simple classicism in St. George in the East that he built in his attic at the same time. So this is Nicholas Hawksmoor's natural mode of expression as an architect. Now let's go back to Westminster Abbey for a moment, a building I referred to earlier. This is the facade of Westminster Abbey. Most of Westminster Abbey dates from between the 13th and the late 15th century, so it is very much a medieval building. Of course, it's one of the iconic medieval buildings of England. It was the coronation church. It still is the coronation church for English kings and queens for a long time. It was the burial church for English monarchs as well. That's the facade. Of course, millions and millions of people every year, visitors, tourists, see that facade and walk through the portal in that facade. What a lot of them don't realize is that the towers are not medieval at all. They're designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor in 1723. Because the towers were never finished in the Middle Ages. And Hawksmoor was hired to finish them. And it's the same problem Wren had at Christ Church. It's, okay, I've got a medieval building, I've got to build towers. What am I going to build? And he doesn't build the sort of tower he would build, if he were building a brand new Baroque church. He builds something that more or less matches what's already there. Now, there are all sorts of little things that give it away as Hawksmoor's, like those roundels at the bottom of the towers, especially one of them being a clock. That would never have happened in the Middle Ages. Above that, you've got these things called segmental arch pediments. Segmental because the top curve forms a portion of a round-headed arch. That is very much a classical feature that you'd never see on an actual medieval Gothic building. That opening above, he's repeated from below, but you can't really see it from where you are. You'll have to take my word for it. But he simplifies the tracer, he cleans it up, makes it less busy. All these details will tell you that, this is 18th century work by Nicholas Hawksmoor. It's not actual medieval work. But overall, clearly his main goal was to harmonize and to make it work together and to respect the fabric of the building that already existed. And the whole thing, of course, does hang together and looks very coherent and convincing as long as you don't look at those tiny little details that suddenly tip you off that you're dealing with more than one building campaign here. Now this is actually, Westminster Abbey came a little later than what I think is an even more remarkable example of Hawksmoorian Gothic at All Souls College. Very similar problem. He's told to design a college quadrangle, and one arm of that quadrangle will be a medieval church chapel that already exists. So he's got the same problem. And clearly, as Wren had done in Oxford before, he resolved to make it Gothic to agree with the founder's work. And the most famous, most iconic part of it is this twin tower facade, a very distant echo of what he would later complete at Westminster Abbey. And of course, it's Gothic. It's got buttresses and pinnacles and pointed arches and spiky bits on the tower, very vertical, that sort of thing. It's quite convincingly Gothic in that respect. But if you look at it, look at the simplification of it, look at the sort of bold, unornamented, angular volumes, and you realize it's just as closely connected in a sense to the classical towers that Hawksmoor was designing when he had a completely blank page in front of him, as it is to anything in medieval Gothic. And it's quite an extraordinary achievement because he's managed to make something that is quite convincingly Gothic and that would agree with the Gothic chapel that's right beside it, but is still very emphatically and unmistakably his own. It's Nicholas Hawksmoor Gothic. So there are a couple couple of 17th century, or 17th and 18th century examples, where does that leave modernism and modern architecture? Can modern architecture do this? Can modern architects take that sort of attitude? Well, it is trickier, because of course modernism is founded in part on the premise that no, the historical styles aren't suited to our life, our lifestyles, our situation, our societies anymore. Modern architecture, right from the beginning with people like Louis Sullivan in the late 19th century, to a large extent defines itself as standing apart from all those historical styles. So can modern architecture, please come back, find a way to harmonize with the past without copying it, because copying is sort of anathema to modern architectural sensibilities. And some modern architects have found a rather resourceful, ingenious way of doing just that. To summarize this, I'd say there are a couple of ways you can harmonize with the building. One is you can copy its forms, duplicate them. We saw Renaissance were doing that to some extent, but also, of course, varying forms. But you can actually imitate forms. The other thing you can do is you can adopt and apply and reuse the underlying principles behind those forms. And that is what some of the more resourceful modern architects have done when faced with this same situation of making a new addition to a historic building. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's examine here. Classicism, the architecture of Greece and Rome. This is the Temple of Concord in Agrigento in southern Sicily. One of the archetypal classical buildings, the Greek temple. Now, classicism as a style, there are two layers to classicism, as there are with any style. One is a layer of forms. There are certain physical forms that we associate with classicism. You can see a bunch of them here. Columns, in this case, fluted columns. Capitals, you've got abaci on top of the capitals. You've got the architrave, the frieze, the cornice, the whole thing forms the entablature. The cornice becomes a triangle, which is the pediment. The whole thing's called the temple facade. This is sort of a shopping list of the physical forms that constitute classicism. That's one thing that classicism is, but classicism is also a group of ideas or values or principles or, in Wales, emotional content. You can also almost make an analogy between the body and soul. I don't want to take that analogy too far because it will seem a little sort of weird and new agey and that sort of thing. But if those forms are the body of classicism, well, what's the soul of classicism? It's qualities like order, balance, symmetry, moderation, never extraordinarily tall or extraordinarily wide, careful attention to proportions, often by using a square module, a certain rigorous and invisible rationality and lucidity of the design. These are the underlying principles of classicism. And modern architects started to determine that you could build something harmonious with an older building, not necessarily by imitating the forms, but by adopting those underlying principles and saying something about those principles, or using those principles to say something in a modern architectural language. And here's an example with which I suspect you're all pretty familiar. The Bank of Canada, 1937. It's a classical building, a severe 20th century version of a classical building. It's got fluted pilasters, entablature. Those forms are there. Now, as I expect you know, in the 1970s, Arthur Erickson was invited to come and do a significant addition to the Bank of Canada. And Erickson, like a lot of modern architects, decided, well, I'm not going to imitate the forms. That's just not on. That's not what I want to do. But he did look at these underlying principles, order, balance, symmetry, moderation, etc., etc. And what he did was create something in entirely modern 1970s language that was based on those same underlying principles. And as I think you know, it looks like this. So you have this perfect bilateral symmetry. You've actually got a tripartite division, which is another classical idea that he borrows from Andrea Palladio, the great Renaissance architect. That's laid out in terms of floor plan, not unlike a Palladian villa from the 16th century. You've got a sense of chaste ornament, a simplicity, a sense of moderation in its ornament, and that sort of thing. You've also got some forms actually slightly echo. This copper form here echoes in color and texture the roof of the historic building, but in terms of its proportions and placing, echoes the entablature of a classical building. So they're allusions there to the historic building, but he's taken ideas like symmetry and restraint, ornamental restraint, and incorporated those into a completely modern building and produced something that, in my view anyway, consequently does not detract from that modern building. In fact, he's added the wonderful touch. This is a bit sort of warm limestone to this building, and he's used a cool glass here, so it's almost as if that's like a little exquisite watercolor, and he's added a window mat around it, and as a result, the original building just really pops because it's framed by this contemporary fabric. So there's an example, I think, of not copying forms, but still figuring out how to produce a harmonious addition to the historic building. Now, can we apply this to the Chateau style, the Chateau Laurier? Yeah, certainly we can. The Chateau style has certain forms, physical features that we associate with it. You know, I list a few here: turrets, gables, stonework. Unlike classicism, it's asymmetrical. It's often aggressively asymmetrical. It's emphatically vertical. Crenellations or machicolations, that sort of feature there. Curves and angles. It's not just straight lines and right angles. Those are the physical features of the Chateau Laurier. So if you're building an addition to the Chateau Laurier, you could, of course, just use those features and build those into it. Or you could go the Arthur Erickson route. So what would be the underlying principles of the Chateau style? They're really almost more like, it's like the emotional content of the Chateau style. Romance, luxury, opulence, fantasy, imagination, wonder, dreams. That, in a sense, is the soul of the Chateau style. So that would be another way. If you don't want to use those forms, you can say, forget those forms. I'm going to use modern forms, contemporary language, but I'm going to base it on those principles of the Chateau style. Either of those is potentially a route to an exciting, harmonious addition to the Chateau Laurier. Now, of course, when the addition to the Chateau Laurier we're now considering was first put forward, the idea of copying the forms was rejected immediately, out of hand, absolutely out of the question. Never going to do that. Only a simpleton would, etc., etc., etc. Okay, fine. You've got another route to go here, the way Arthur Erickson went with the classical building of the Bank of Canada. So I think it's very reasonable to ask, are the new designs we've been given embracing those underlying principles? Are they based on those underlying principles? Here's the most recent version of it. When you look at that, romance, luxury, opulence, fantasy, imagination, wonder, dreams, do you think that? Or do you think Excel spreadsheet? Not that I want to state a position here. So that is a reasonable question to ask. Those are, I think, reasonable criteria to apply to any addition that's being proposed for the Chateau Laurier. Now, here's a question that comes up a lot. If we're reading today's news stories about the addition to the Chateau, it's already come up several times in the comments as, why can't they build an addition in the same style as the original? A number of people ask that question. Now, I'm probably not supposed to tell you this, so I'd appreciate it if you kept it a secret. But they can. Through Heritage Ottawa, I encountered a very interesting guy a year or so ago named Michael Pfaff. He did his undergraduate, he's Canadian, did his undergraduate BFA, I think, at the University of Windsor, and then he went off to the States and did an MArch, and then after his MArch did what they call post-professional master's degree, so another master's degree in architecture at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, the School of Architecture, and his thesis project was an addition to the Chateau Laurier. And he did it specifically because he saw what was being proposed, and he was very alarmed. And his position is, well, you can build in exactly the same style. You can, well, actually, here's the way he put it. It's one of the email exchanges we had. My design is based upon my belief that buildings should respond to their context. The modern addition does not respond to its context in any way. So that is his position. And actually, the University of Notre Dame is quite well known for being very, very respectful and mindful and interested in historical styles. I bring this up, I'm not saying this is necessarily the best option. Some people's view it would be, and some people's view it wouldn't be, but it is an option. There are alternatives this into it because this is like the option we've not been allowed to talk about. It's like taboo. No, you can never, you can't copy, you can't imitate. That's wrong. That's for simpletons and unsophisticated people and so on and so forth. And I frankly found it really irritating that the number of ideas and options and alternatives that we have been enabled to consider in the public discussion of the addition of the Chateau Laurier has been so narrow. In fact, if you look at today's version, and if you look at the previous version, I forget how many months ago it was, I don't remember now. Anyway, if you look at the previous version and look at today's version and compare them, have any of you ever flown on Porter Airlines? I see a few nods. You know, at the back page, I think this would be a good candidate for that. There's Mr. Porter, and there's the penultimate version, and there's today's version. And if by the end of the flight, you can actually circle all the different, and this is really bugged me. I think our public conversation about this has been really, really compromised because the range of options we have been allowed to consider has been so narrow. And that was the thinking behind something that David referred to a little while ago, the exhibition that Heritage Ottawa sponsored of Carleton's student work of alternative designs for the Chateau Laurier. Now, I'm not saying that any of these designs is necessarily viable. None of these designs was done with full information about the brief that the architect of the Chateau Laurier would have been given. But what was so refreshing to me about these Carleton student designs, which were all done in a course taught by my colleague Mariana Esponda, is that they present all sorts of different ideas, and they really enlarge our sense of what's possible, what might work. I mean, it doesn't have to be a box. I found this so refreshing, and it's partly my frustration with the limited range of options we've been presented with that not only motivated me to get these students to exhibit this stuff publicly, but I also made it short. It's a 60-second video to promote the exhibition. No one really saw it, but I'm going to subject you to it now. Basically a 60-second visual rant, and the audio will work. Here we go. So that was a plea for fresh thinking. And of course, I'd say this would promote the exhibition, so these details are no longer relevant. But it was just, it grew out of not just my, but the sort of longing on the part of a number of people to really think about what's possible here. Let's think big, let's dream, what could be done here? And of course, that is precisely the sort of conversation they're starting to have in France. The roof of Notre Dame burned in Paris, the spire collapsed. They've got to rebuild the roof, and they've announced they're going to have a competition for the design of the spire. The terms of the competition haven't even been announced yet, but there's already been, you may have seen them, a number of proposals stuck on the website. We can do this, we can do that. Some of them are crazy, some of them are completely impractical, some of them are very interesting. But in a sense, at this stage, it doesn't matter. It's at this stage where you want to cast the net widely and entertain ideas and enlarge your sense of what is possible, and maybe give yourself a shot at coming up with something that's really visionary. They've already started that process in Paris. We never got that process here in Ottawa for the Chateau Laurier. Now, I just want to finish off with a bit of a postscript. It's the accusation here that I get sometimes. Other people have taken similar positions to mine get. You guys just don't like modern architecture. Now, it's a very convenient an accusation to hide behind, because that gives your design an excuse for not being liked. But think about who has opposed the addition of the Chateau Laurier. My good friend Andrew Waldron, who's one of the most established architectural historians in the country, who's a specialist in modern architecture, loves modern architecture. He's opposed the Chateau Laurier. Another person who's come out very publicly against it is Phyllis Lambert, founder of the Canadian Centre for Architecture, student and champion of Mies van der Rohe, the woman rather who got Mies his first big North American gig. You can't say that Phyllis Lambert doesn't like modern architecture, but she has spoken out very, very eloquently against the designs we've been presented with. So this idea that people who resist this are just anti-modern, it's absolute nonsense, and even trying to defend myself on this. Some of you may know Andrew did a book a couple years back called Exploring Capital, a guidebook to architecture in Ottawa, and I did the photographs for it. Now, this is what is called the National Printing Bureau. And that's one of the buildings in the book. And when I went to photograph that, the front of it is a Beaux-Arts classicist, it's an Ernest Cormier building. The front of it is a masonry Beaux-Arts classicist building, which should be right up my alley as a historian. But when I photographed it, I thought, no, I'm going to run around the back. The modern back, the international style back, we have this glorious curtain wall, which is just sheer glass, this curtain of glass. And especially at this time of day, the light shines through it, and you see the masonry, which is actually load-bearing at the back, and you see the sort of structural genius of modernism very nakedly at the back of this building. I thought, that's the exciting part. So no, I don't hate modernism, honestly. I'm a huge fan of Barry Godolsky's tower at the Museum of Nature. Essentially, it finishes, replaces the tower that was supposed to be there, but had to be dismantled. But does it in a modern language and with modern materials. And I fully agree with what Andrew wrote in his book, that the Ismailia Mamad is one of the most exciting and beautiful and important pieces of architecture in the city, a magnificent piece of modern architectural sculpture. So, no, I don't hate modern architecture. Honestly, I don't. What I like is harmonious architecture. And I'm going to finish off with a promise that I will be the first to write letters of protest and write an op-ed for the Ottawa Citizen, and if necessary, chain myself to the door of this building on the day when some genius comes up with the idea of adding a Gothic tower to this thing in London. Thank you very much.